The question is, how's it going? And the answer is always, yeah, I'm really busy. Why was it almost this badge of honor? And why has it been a thing that has been intrinsically linked with our perception of perhaps success?
We just like being busy. We're trying to do too many things at the same time because we were educated for many years, and today the culture hasn't changed. We live in the culture of more and faster. Everything needs to be done more, faster, now.
My other question from our member was, how do I set a healthy pace without sacrificing performance?
Stop, click pause, and do a quick replay first. What is working and what's not working at all? How often do we do team performance reviews? And we ask, what's working? What should we do less of? What strength are we underutilizing? We don't have this kind of conversations. We live in this culture of more and faster, so we're constantly speeding like that bullet train. We're moving forward. We don't know where we're going, but we're going, with a very high speed. The first thing to do is to get off that train.
Kate, lovely to have you with us on the Fall Forward podcast this morning. Kate Sotsenko, you are the founder of The Good Busy, a productivity and leadership coach. Kate, welcome to the Fall Forward podcast.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And thank you for having me, Steve.
It's a pleasure. And it's, of course, lovely to spend time with you, Kate. Kate, today we're talking about productivity. We're talking about the busyness challenge that we all face as leaders. And we're talking about more broadly as leaders, how we can build our teams and our lives to hopefully be more successful, more resilient, and hopefully happier, which is something that I know all our members and listeners are always keen to do, in fact, myself included. Before we dive into it, Kate, I'd love to perhaps just give us some context as to why we're talking to you about this subject today. Why is it so important to you, and why have you now built your whole life and career around this particular area of work? Perhaps share with us your story.
Yeah, so I love working. First of all, let's put it out there. I love working and I love being busy. So we'll talk about it. What's the meaning of busyness for me? But I think because I went through a nearly burnout when I was in my 20s, late 20s, I've asked myself a very important question at that time. Is that it? Is that the only way? And I started my adventure at that time to figure out what could be another way. And I think that it's not over yet. I'm still figuring it out, but I think that I've got some knowledge today that I'm putting in place that helps me to work in a much more sustainable way with that I used to before. And I truly enjoy coaching, teaching, mentoring. And my background before I became a coach, I was in CRM, client events, client experience management. I worked for luxury and hospitality companies, and I did enjoy that part of my career, but now I want to do something else. I really think that I want to help and inspire people to enjoy working. And I know it's not really a synonym today of the corporate space. Not a lot of people are trying to get out of the corporate space. And I think it's a great place to be. We just need to change the way we're working. And that's what I'm trying to inspire people to do and teach people to do, is how to be good busy, remove all that unnecessary work that we are all doing in corporate space, and actually do meaningful work that drives value and results so that we can have time after work for what and who we love.
How did we get to this place, Kate, where for such a long time, I know in particularly my kind of earlier career, and even now I find myself doing it, the question is, how's it going? And the answer is always, yeah, I'm really busy. Why is that a measure that we hold ourselves to? And why was it almost this badge of honor that often I'll speak to members and have conversations, and they're like, oh, yes, I'm really busy. Why is that the thing that we go to? And why is it, and why has it been a thing that has been intrinsically linked with our perception of perhaps success, when in reality that's not necessarily the case?
I think a very short answer to your question is that we just like being busy. And in reality, being busy is not a bad thing, because if you go and look what it simply means being occupied. And we can be occupied with so many things. we are occupied right now. We're having this conversation. We can be occupied doing some other type of work. We can be occupied cooking. We can be occupied playing with children. Doctors are busy with patients, right? And that's absolutely fine. The problem is that sometimes we do not like things that we are busy with, but we're still doubling down on that busyness. And that's why we feel that being busy, we feel bad around being busy. We're trying to do too many things at the same time because we were educated for many years. And today the culture hasn't changed. We live in the culture of more and faster. Everything needs to be done more, faster, now. And because we still have this idea that the more and faster will get us to where we want to be faster, will be more successful, that's why we're constantly adding things onto our plate instead of actually thinking, okay, what is worth to be busy with and what is not worth to be busy with. I'm sure we have tons of different examples. I mean, you worked in corporate space as well. So we have situations when we are actually busy with work, knowing that it's not going to produce any value, it's not going to serve for any strategic decision, it's not going to serve anybody. I have tons of stories about this, but we're still doing the work. Why? I think that's the bigger question that we need to ask ourselves. How do we choose things that are the right things to be busy with? And how do we let go of things that are not serving us at all? So maybe that's when we start a little bit changing perspective of what is busy. Because being busy is a good thing. It's actually a good thing. It's just really we need to fix what we're busy with.
It's you raise a great point in there, which is that the busy with the right outcome, busy with the right output. Drive. I think if I think about the times in my career where I've been busiest and happiest, they are driving to or achieving a specific outcome or an output, and the times perhaps where I've been unhappiest have been when I've been busiest, but as you rightly point out, maybe not achieving something or not feeling like I'm really achieving something. How should leaders then think about setting up their teams or setting up their approach to this? What are some of the things that you're seeing? I mean, you work across all these different industries, Kate, helping leaders to do this. What are you seeing as some of the most effective ways in kind of tackling this busyness problem?
I think the first thing that we need to have is clarity. Where do we want to be? Right? Then we obviously have the idea, of the why from Simon Sinek is that why do we want to get there? Right? You just before we started this conversation, we had a quick chat and you explained to me why you started Blend, the community, right? So obviously that why is important, is the engine. But at the end, when it comes to productivity and busyness, we need an end destination because destination gives our business direction. Without that clear direction, our business is sporadic. It's what a lot of people call, the hamster wheel, what I call the bed busy wheel. You're constantly doing things, but you're not getting anywhere. But how can you get somewhere if you don't know where you're going, right? And here is the thing, we have still a lot of situations when teams do not have clarity on where they are going. I read a Microsoft study a couple of years ago where they highlighted that lack of clear goals is still one of the key obstacles to productivity at work. And yet everybody knows the SMART framework, right? Everybody talks about SMART goals, right? But here you go. We still have the same problem. We lack clarity. The second problem that we have is that we have way too many goals. Once again, we live in that culture of more. We are constantly trying to do more, achieve more. And when you have way too many goals, it's really difficult for you to hit any of those goals. I trained 10 years to become a tennis pro. You don't play two tournaments at the same time. But yet in business, it's absolutely fine to play, not just two, but 10. In March, I received actually an HR leader shared with me their performance review. They had 14 goals. 14. So just want to be clear here. It's not four, it's 14. How do they know what's important? How do they get busy with the things that matter? Because if they're going through all their to-do list, what's the measurement to decide what's important on that list and it's not? It's a goal. It's what is your priority in the moment. So when you have 14 goals and you have a list of 50 to-dos, well, everything on that to-do is urgent and important, right? Because something matches every single goal that you have. So the first place for us to actually start is just getting that clarity and answering that question, where are we going? Where do we want to be? We can't be in all places at the same time. And I think this is the biggest challenge today, is that we are trying to be everywhere all at once.
Your point there, Kate, was around prioritization and setting out very clear goals when it comes to leading teams. Why is it still then, as leaders, that we find ourselves in this trap of trying to do too much, setting too many goals, setting too many priorities for people to work on? Because, as you rightly point out, we know the tools, we know the frameworks that help us to avoid that, but yet we're still there. What is it that you see in the conversations you have with leaders that they're falling into in terms of these traps?
I think the reason, I'm just going to answer the first part of the question first. I think that the real reason is because we don't invest enough time to understand our own operational system, human operational system. We focus very much on the external skills, right? We focus today on technology, but we are not necessarily digging deep to understand how do we work and what does more do to us. So there is a wonderful concept that's called the paradox of choice, coined by Barry Schwartz. There is a book and there is also a TED Talk. I'm a massive fan of TED Talk. So that particular TED Talk really changed my perspective on what is productivity. The paradox of choice teaches that more is actually less, because the more choices we have, the more options we have, the more goals, KPIs, tasks we have, the more overwhelmed we become. And when we become overwhelmed, we experience decision fatigue, because we take up to 35,000 decisions a day. It can be tiny decisions, can be big decisions. Many of them are subconscious, but many of them require your mental energy. And if you understand that concept, you are going to understand that productivity is not about adding things, it's about eliminating things. Because that will help you decide better, that will help you to see clearly, and that will help you to get busy with the right things. But we are not studying ourselves, we are not self-curious. We are very curious towards the external world. We're curious how they do things, what is happening there. We are very curious, how can we change people? Knowing that it's impossible to change people. People only change because they want to. They don't change because you told them to or you complained about it, right? And so I really think that we need to learn more about ourselves. Like, look at technology today. We are dependent on technology, and technology is pushing us to do more and faster. But technology studies humans. Technology studies human operational system. That's why we are dependent on technology and not the other way around. And I think this is the underlying issue today, is that we just don't understand how this human technology works first. And I'm not saying that we need all to be psychologists and therapists and scientists, and I'm not, absolutely. And I was terrible at science at school. My biology teacher, which is probably, she heard me talking right now, she'll be like, what? So, but in the last 10 years, that was my journey. That was my journey. Like, I wanted to understand, how can I live better? How can I work better? How can I be a better person? And it might be a cliche when people say, self leadership, but it does start from self. If you don't know how to lead that, you basically one person, how are you going to lead other people? So I think this is overall the underlining part of the busyness problem that we have today.
So if I'm if I think about members and leaders listening to this right now, and myself included, how can we as leaders take the time and really review what that means to us as leaders before we then perhaps start creating a culture and environment for others? How how did you come across that opportunity, and how can we get others to kind of take that journey of self-actualization, I suppose?
Yeah. It's a concept that is, again, I learned through this particular book, The Paradox of Choice. It's called the good enough. It's a concept that I live by today, and it's been years that I'm doing my best to live by this concept in any sphere of my life, because we can always want more. Faster is always possible. We always will strive for something that looks better, for perfection. But in order to enjoy the moment, we need to know what is good enough today. And that good enough applies for the company. What are our good enough goals for this year? It is translating those yearly goals into monthly good enough goals and milestones. It is translating them then in weekly good enough goals and milestones. It is also applying the concept everywhere. When we talk about busyness, well, how much is today? Because I can work 24/7, especially like right now, being an entrepreneur, and a perfectionist and a person who likes working. I can work 24/7. That's that's a choice I can make, but I'm not making that choice because I know what's my good enough. Because I want a sustainable work life, and I want to enjoy life that is also happening beyond work. So I want to spend time with my family. I want to have great relationships around me with my peers and also with my friends. I also want to enjoy reading books, going to the beach, traveling, etc. If I don't make these choices, well, I'm not going to have that. So I need to know what is the good enough. And that's a fantastic concept to embrace. Like we talk about leadership as well today. So what does it mean to be a good leader, a good enough leader? Because you can always do more and you always can do better. We're not perfect, right? But what is good enough today? What do I need to do for myself to feel like I am a good enough? And what does my team need so that I am good enough for them? Because something that looks good enough for you might be slightly different or very different, right? Because there is no universal definitions of great leaders, great managers, and great people overall. We all value different things. So, what are those maximum five things that we value? Because if we go beyond, we're getting into those long lists, and again, we're falling into that trap of more, more, and more, and it's never enough. And that idea of never enough really pushes us to overwork because we're constantly running for more. When is it enough? What is enough? How fast is enough? These are the questions that we need to start answering.
And they're not easy questions, Kate, are they?
Nope.
If I think I'm just sat there thinking to myself about how often do I ask myself those questions, and it's probably not often enough, and because I often feel I'm not good enough, or I'm not doing enough, or whatever. But that's the world that I suppose that we're trying to combat, and for all of us as leaders, trying to be better at having those conversations. Kate, if I think about the theme of our podcast is always around exploring this conversation around failing or falling forward, learning from our mistakes. So, look, you now have a career and a life helping leaders to overcome this busyness challenge and this challenge around being better leaders. What have you seen that's gone wrong for leaders, where perhaps they've prioritized maybe grit over long-term resilience? They've what are some of the kind of big pitfalls that you've seen that perhaps we should be sharing with leaders to be mindful of when they're thinking about busyness, thinking about their strategies as a leader?
Well, I think the one that we often talk about is burnout, obviously. So it's health hazard, first of all. But I think there is also an impact on relationships as well, because relationships play such a huge role in our life. There was the Harvard study, the longest study on happiness, and what they've learned from the study is that what has the highest impact on our happiness is our relationships, is the quality of our relationships. And when we talk about relationships, it's not about just our relationships with our family, with our children, or with friends. We need to also have great relationships at work. Many of my colleagues are friends right now, right? So we often forget that we actually meet a lot of friends at work as well. And I think that we really underestimate this part, this impact, because we often read about it, we see other people going through this, but we never think that it's going to happen to us, right? We're creating that distance. And I think that just having that in mind, that maybe, and if I continue this way, what would happen? What would be the impact? These are, again, great questions to ask. Overall, I've already gave a few examples of questions here, but I think overall we are not asking ourselves enough questions. We are moving too fast. There is no time for questions. We often hear people talking about we need to listen more, leaders need to listen more. What there is nothing to listen to if you do not ask questions. And there is a study that shows that in adult conversations, normal adult conversations, not when we're recording a podcast, but when we are in a meeting or we're meeting in a hallway, there are less than 25% of questions in our conversations. We leave guessing, assuming. And that's why we assume that this is urgent, that is important. We don't clarify. And that's why we live in that culture where we're constantly assuming and running, and we need to go faster. And the consequences of this is what's in the headlines today: burnout, 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 burnout. And we start feeling that it's a norm, but it's not. There is another way to work. We start positioning work like it's an evil of the workplace. Busyness is the evil of the workplace. It's not. It's our own decisions. We're just making wrong decisions. That's why I like to call productivity, it's a game of decisions. It's always a trade-off. But what are you trading off right now? It's a choice.
If I think about your journey, you mentioned right at the start of our conversation that the desire for you to kind of invest your life and your work in this space came from your own burnout journey. What was the moment when you became aware of that? Because you rightly pointed out, and I think myself, I experienced a point in my career where I'd experienced burnout, and you view it as if it's always going to happen to somebody else. It's not going to happen to me, and then suddenly you're in it. What was the moment for you that you realized, oh my gosh, I'm here, I'm at that point? And then how did you deal with that, and what did you do? And then how are you now more consciously aware of those moments in your own career, and then being able to identify maybe in others? Because of course, as a leader, that's incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was easy. I started to lose sight. So it sounds very dramatic, but it
Wow.
actually was dramatic, because even when you stop seeing for just a few seconds, it feels like an eternity. And you understand that something is wrong. But it was happening for about 3 months. I didn't necessarily talk to anyone about this because I was busy. I worked for the company of my dreams, and I needed to prove myself that I can do it. I'm going to be successful. But one day I was going home, I was walking home, and I was crossing a very, very hectic street. I was living in China at that time. And while I was crossing the street, everything just became blank. I couldn't see anything. I just froze. I was super scared. Again, it was China. So I was extremely scared, terrified to be hit by a car. But my sight came back, and I just ran across the street. But instead of going home, I just rushed to the ER, because that was really for me the moment is like something is wrong. And when I got to the ER, that's where I was diagnosed. Well, didn't necessarily use the word burnout at that time. So it was around 2013, 2012, 2013. So they used the word overwork. And so I was prescribed 3 weeks of full on rest, no screens, no computer, no TV, no books, like absolutely nothing. And that was for me the point where I started asking myself slightly better questions. It's like it's not the way, because if that's the way, I'm not going to get to where I want to be because I'm just gonna lose my sight completely, right? So that was the risk, a big risk for me. So I had to completely reevaluate my choices. And what it taught me also is that I'm actually much more in control than I thought that I was. And this is to the second part of your question, what do I see in leaders today? Is that many people think that they are not in control. And I think that we are. I've experienced this, and I can from my experience I can speak it that it is possible. We just need to learn to make better choices. But to make better choices, we need to understand our operational system, and we need to learn to ask more and better questions.
How, if you've not experienced that moment, Kate, obviously one of the reasons we're having this conversation is hopefully for the people listening and the leaders in the community, to prevent them from getting to the point where they're walking across the road and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my sight. We don't want obviously people to get to that point. What are the questions? How do they start that journey? How do they start a journey to ask themselves and then their teams better questions? um, uh, what should they be thinking about?
I think a lot of times when I work with leaders, especially one on one, they share with me everything that is going on right now. So everything that they don't want, right? But then I ask them the question, okay, what do you want instead? And very often people don't know the answer. But if I have to give a piece of advice where to start for those leaders who maybe potentially are listening today, is start by actually asking what you don't want and see how much of that you're leaving right now. Because starting from what we don't want actually helps us to understand what we want. It doesn't mean that you just flip 180 degrees and that's the answer, but it's a great starting point. Again, it's eliminating possibilities. So eliminate already, list everything that you don't want and see how many of it is actually you're leaving at day to day. And that's a really, really good place to start. And when you identify those things, then you can identify solutions to eliminate those things. But you need to know exactly what you don't want first. This is where I would start.
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting point. And as a leader myself, I definitely don't ask myself that question enough, for sure. Um, what if I think about then translating that into creating an environment for your teams to lead the people and the organizations that our members and our listeners do? How do you then foster an environment that embodies that? Because asking questions of yourself and prioritizing your own personal gain is one thing, but creating an environment for leaders to be successful doing that and their teams to be successful doing that is another. How have you seen, and what advice perhaps would you share around creating that environment for success, and successful or good busyness, as you talk about?
Yeah. It's again, it's a cliche, but it starts with you, with a leader, right? We always talk about lead by example. It is a cliche, but it's scientific as well. One of the most organic ways for us to learn as human beings is learning by observation. So we actually look up to people, especially leaders, and we notice things and we believe that these things got them where they are. And potentially, if you want to get there as well, you are going to start copying things, copying and imitating their behavior. The caveat is that you copy, and you copy both good and bad. So all leaders need to be aware, first and foremost, of their own behavior. We often talk about teams, and sometimes I hear people say, yes, my team is unproductive, my team is not doing this, my team is that, and that. Well, your team is normally your own mirror. Okay? So they are imitating you, they are learning from you. in real time. So, whatever behavior you want your team to adopt, that is the behavior that you need to adopt first. So, if there is one particular habit that you are working on and you need to, for example, asking more questions, you need to start asking more questions out loud. So it means asking more questions to yourself, maybe even out loud, or sharing that you've been reflecting on this particular question, starting asking more questions in meetings. Coaching your team is asking questions, right? So this is actually easy to create great teams if you are working on yourself. And I know that you mentioned this is just ourselves, but everything starts with us. We can't change other people, but we can show others what's possible and what kind of culture we want to create and live in.
If I think then about translating that into the working world in most of these large organizations that our members and listeners come from, the pressure for them is quarterly success, quarterly results, um, uh, productivity goals that feel sometimes unachievable. How can we balance that desire to build the environment, ask the questions, take the time to be good busy, and the pressure of an organization, of a stock market, of investors to say these results are expected? Because those two things often don't feel like they sit together. Um, how can we be mindful of those two things and still give ourselves space? What would you suggest, or what have you seen perhaps leaders are doing to be successful there?
Generally, I believe that everyone wants to achieve results. People want to produce good work, right? The problem is that we believe that to get to those results, we need to do more. And we're constantly adding things. We're not stopping to reflect what's working, what doesn't. Oh, this is not working. Let's eliminate this. Okay, let's try something different. This is what we're not doing. I think productivity and good business is all about results, right? Oftentimes people say, well, busyness doesn't mean productivity. Couldn't agree more. But to be productive, you need to get busy just with the right things. But when you are not stopping to ask yourself a few questions, you are dabbling down on things that are not working. And people get frustrated, upset because they are spending way too much time working, so overworking, and not getting anything. So we really need to get busy with the right things. So for this, we need sometimes to slow down. There's a fantastic quote that I love. It's called "Slowly is the fastest way to get to where you want to be." So we need to learn to work with slightly different pace, because pace allows those thoughts to come in, those reflections to come in, and helps us to choose better, to make better decisions so that we get busy with the things that are creating value in progress. That's what productivity is. It's not about doing more. It's not about squeezing every minute of the day. Again, I played tennis for 10 years. You can win a match 6-0, 6-0, or you can win a match 7-6, 7-6. It's a
Yeah.
choice. In
Uh,
sports, it's less of a choice sometimes. But in business, very often it is a choice. It's just learning to see things that shouldn't be done at all. And today we're talking so much about AI because AI is going to solve productivity. There are already reports that I read about in Forbes that AI has just added work. Why? Because we still think that productivity is all about going faster. So what do leaders do? They end up doing a lot of work with AI that shouldn't be done at all.
Yeah, I definitely have heard, and speaking to members, seen a lot of that already happening, where the doing more doesn't equal more conundrum. But listening to you there, Kate, also reminded me of a conversation with one of our authors and leaders, Robert or Bob Sutton, in San Francisco, who it really stuck with me when he mentioned it. But do a lot less, do cut out a lot, and you'll be more successful. And it's a question often that I forget to ask myself. So I'm sure that's a useful tip for people to be taking away from today. So thank you for that. Um, Kate, one of the things that we always do on the podcast, we ask members in advance for a question that they might want to put to you. I'm actually going to put two to you, actually, because there's a couple of really good ones that came in. So I'll try and put you on the spot from our members. And the first one is, what's one thing that you wish more senior leaders would stop doing when in high pressure environments?
Is doing more. So when you are in a high pressure environment, that's the moment to actually click pause and to say, whoa, where am I going? Okay, what should change? Because once again, we think that constant pressure and constant urgency is a norm. It's not. It's absolutely not. There is also I don't know who said that, but that urgency is just the result of poor planning of someone else. So urgent things do happen, but it seems that every day in corporate world is a crisis. Is that normal? No, it's not, because life is not a crisis per se, right? So doing more is the first thing to stop doing, because oftentimes when something is not working and there's a lot of pressure to perform, what are we asked to do? Can you prepare an action plan? And that action plan has 20 steps, right? And we start doing everything all at once again. But sometimes it's just realizing that maybe one thing on that particular list in our action plan will get us 80% of the result already. But because we're doing all at once, we're spreading ourselves thin, we're spreading our teams thin, and we're not able to see clearly what's working and what's not. Once again, coming back to tennis, that's why we play 1 point at a time. We don't play 10 points at a time. Right?
Yeah, sport has such great analogies with business, and I was sat watching the Wimbledon final on Saturday. Let's talk about the women's final, and I just felt so sorry for her in that moment where, and we've all had it in our careers as well, where no matter what you do or no matter what you try, you can't get it to work.
It's not working.
And I wonder whether for her, if she'd have just stopped and asked herself the question of what's the one thing that I can do here, whether that maybe she'd have had a slightly different outcome on the thing. So I think it's a really pertinent thing to talk about. Kate, thank you. My other question from our member was, hi Kate, I'm leading a team that's stretched really thin. How do I set a healthy pace without sacrificing performance?
I'm not going to share anything different. Again, it's really stop. This is the first thing to do. And my framework starts with a pause. So click pause and do a quick replay first. What is working and what's not working at all? And I think it's not just a question to ask to yourself, just bringing the team together. There is one concept that I talked about in the past on LinkedIn is, how often do we do team reviews, team performance reviews? Because, individual performance reviews, they're very common, right? Everybody had in their life. But how often do we actually put the team together? Not a team meeting, but actually performance reviews. And we ask our team, to everyone in the team, what's working? What should we do less of? What strength are we underutilizing? What strength do we have as a team when all our strengths are coming together? We don't have this kind of conversations. We assume and guess, and we live in this culture of more and faster. So we're constantly speeding like that bullet train. We're moving forward. We don't know where we're going, but we're going, with a very high speed. So the first thing to do is to get off that train. Get off that train and start to define, first of all, what is not worth doing at all. So creating a little bit of space. It's really just creating a little bit of space. I don't know if you know Marie Kondo, but it's the same thing, right? If you start putting so much clothes into your wardrobe, at a certain point, everything is just gonna collapse. So think what you can take out first before you start adding. And that's how you change the pace, is constantly eliminating things, not adding, eliminating. There is so many things that we are doing and we shouldn't be doing. And once again, analogy of sports, any type of sports, right? I'm not I don't know much about football, but when they go and start playing, they're using one strategy for a match, right? And if it's not working, they're going to change it maybe in the next half of the match. They're not doing everything at once, and that's what we're trying to do. We're always trying to do everything at once, and it's absolutely okay to pause and slow down.
Kate, thank you. I think such practical advice for us today to listen to, and as you mentioned, in the age of AI, where we're going to be even more inclined to do more, I think the advice from today's conversation about pausing, stopping, asking questions of yourself and your team are going to be such important skills for leaders to remember. And often sounds so simple, doesn't it? But actually, it's so easily forgotten. So, thank you, Kate. I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and have found it a good reminder for myself, I'm sure, as well as for our members and our listeners. So, thank you. And I know that you're open to conversations with lots of people through LinkedIn and the community, where you often are helping people to free up their time. So I'm sure they'll be reaching out with you with questions and the like. But thank you so much. Before we leave you, we always end our podcast with a recommendation or something that members and listeners would find valuable, something that you hold very dear to yourself in your own career. It could be a book, it could be something that you do in your life, an experience, something that you would recommend to do to others. So I'll put you on the spot and ask you what your recommendation may be.
I'd like to recommend a book and the TED Talk that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, The Paradox of Choice, because that's the book that completely changed my perspective on productivity, on the way we should work, and how we take our decisions and how we move through our life, and what does this more culture actually doing to us immediately. And so if you have some time, there's a wonderful book. If you have a little bit less time, it's a TED Talk of 20 minutes, and I'm sure it's going to plant some amazing seeds for everyone.
Wonderful. Kate, thank you so much. I know you're heading off on holiday soon, so enjoy your break. And I hope at some point we get to meet to play a game of tennis, albeit I know you'll absolutely kick my butt, but that's okay.
We'll see that.
And thanks again. It's been a real
Thank you,
pleasure to have
Steve.
you, Kate, and we'll speak to you again soon here on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Make sure you subscribe to the 4 Forward channel so you don't miss any new episodes. I'll see you soon.